Bible as literature, okay? This alone, if anything, blew my mind. There were probably, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 different things when I was in seminary that I just blew my mind. And this was one of them. In fact, I think, we get to it in a little bit. I'll introduce you to the guy who blew my mind. Some misconceptions that the Bible is a manual for right living. No, it's not. Okay? That the Bible is one type of literature all the way through. No, it's not. In fact, as you'll notice in one of the other videos, it said that even when you have a predominantly narrative type book, you will still have poetry in it. You will still have wisdom texts in it. You'll still have prose discourse in it. But even though the bulk of it is narrative. How many of you guys are familiar with, oh good grief, Philippians 2, where is it? Yeah, therefore, if there is any encouragement, now bear in mind this is discourse, okay? Therefore, if there is any encouragement in Christ, if there is any consolation in love, if there is any fellowship of the Spirit, if there is affection and compassion, make my joy complete by being of the same mind, maintaining the same love, united in spirit, intent on one purpose. Do nothing from selfish or empty conceit, but with humility of mind regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. Have this attitude in yourselves, which is also in Christ Jesus. What's the next word? This is Philippians 2, 5, 6. 2, 5, and 6. So what's the first word of verse 6? Who? In ancient Greek literature, in letters like this, when you start a next sentence like this with a relative pronoun like who, you are now opening up poetry. Who, although he existed in the form of God, this is like a hymn that was sung in the early church. Who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, and being made in the likeness of men, being found in the appearance as man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. For this reason also God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. It introduces poetry. That is actually poetry. Some Bible translations will actually break it off to look like a psalm. Okay, so it'll line up like a psalm, like you're used to seeing when you open Psalms. Mine doesn't. But when you do that, when it starts like that, and you'll start to catch different things like that. There's one in Colossians too. But that's a poem. That's not just prose literature. The Bible is a book of theology. No, it's not. Anybody can read the Bible with ease. No, they can't. I had a professor. Actually, you know what? Jet Bingham used to do this too. You can have this back when you learn to read it right.
No, I can't.
Yeah, exactly.
I stole my book.
Yeah, exactly. So they used to say, you can have this back when you learn to read it right. Guys, it's ancient Jewish literature. Do you honestly expect someone to open up Shakespeare and just boom, go? No, of course not. So why on earth would you put ancient Jewish literature in someone's hands and say, here, this is easy. Go read Mark, or go read Genesis, or go read Huh? You never do that. You have to do preparation work beforehand before you just dive off into the book. Now, I will tell you, and I was telling Joe and Ryan this at lunch, I'm not a big advocate of standing on the corner handing out Bibles for this very reason. Because you're just saying, here you go, good luck. Now, I will also tell you, I'd be an idiot to say that God has not used that to bring people to Christ. Of course he has. But I'm not a big advocate of it. I don't think that's best practice. Okay? But that's my opinion. Okay? But for that reason, no, you can't just read it with ease. Okay? This guy changed me forever. This is Charles Bayless. In fact, he was very gracious last semester. He offloaded a ton of materials and actually let me use one of his assignments for OT 101 here at CDI. He was my Old Testament 1, Old Testament 2 professor. Amazing guy. But he taught me that the Bible is literature. Read it like a book. Forget the chapter numbers. Forget the chapter verses. Forget the headings. Forget it all. In fact, ESV, I was so excited. They made a version of their Bible with no chapters, no verses, and no headings. You just read it like a book.
You don't know what section you're in?
Huh.
Like I wouldn't know if I was in Philemon or Titus or anything?
Well, no, it's got divisions of the actual books.
Okay.
But when you open up the book, once you get into the text of the book, there are no headings, no verses, no chapter heading, or no chapters, nothing. It's just read through like someone just wrote it. It's awesome. I think it's a great idea. The only problem is when you're actually studying, it makes it hard to find stuff. But it helps push you in that direction of understanding it's just like any other piece of literature, and you need to treat it like that. Now, obviously, it is a special piece of literature because it's the Word of God. But when we look at it, it's still literature, and treat it like that. But this guy, honest to goodness, one of the biggest things that changed. Because I used to read the Bible like, oh, I'm going to read this little column here, and it means this. Okay, now I'm going to read this column over here, and it's like a bunch of columns slapped together, you know. Not really treating it as a whole book, a whole argument. You know, at the end of one of Paul's letters, he says, and don't forget to bring my cloak with you whenever you come visit me. Why? Because he's made this whole argument about what his behavior should be like the entire book, and now he's at the end and says, I wonder if he's going to do what I asked him to do. Hey, why don't you bring my cloak?
See, he's read the material in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of this, it's like this test at the end of it, okay? And I'll see if you actually paid attention. Or, you know, all these, this is the thing you have to understand, every little component adds to the overall story. Okay? You've got to treat it like literature, even if it's one of Paul's letters. Okay? So let's talk about what that library actually includes. So it's a story, this whole thing. Even the letters of Paul are ultimately stepping into the world of the story. It's kind of like, anybody read Dracula? The original? I'm trying to think what other books
Sorry,
are.
that one wasn't Bible related.
No, it wasn't, sorry. I want to say maybe Frankenstein is written this way, but it's written with correspondence in there, where you've actually got letters from people within the story that they wrote to each other, that the characters wrote to each other. It's like that. It's like you're stepping into their world and actually getting to see the things they pass back and forth to each other, like you're getting on this little archaeological journey into their story world. It's the same way with the Bible. So it's a library of text for some 40 authors over the course of 1,500 years to tell an epic story of epic and unified story of God's creation of the world, man's fall and corruption of that world, and God's work to restore his creation for the sake of his glory. That's what the Bible is. Not theology, not a manual for living. This is what it is. It's a story. I used to hate stories. Would you please just tell me what you want me to know? And I had to read Chuck Swindoll. Oh my goodness. That dude is all story and no content. Now, he really is a lot of content. It's just that he does it all through story. And I despised when I read it. I was like, just tell me what you want me to know. Because I'm one of these guys, if you just tell me, okay, fine, I'll do it. You don't have to like convince me through stories and impact me that way. But as I began to understand story pulls you into its world and makes you think about it, and it works on you. One of my undergrad, when I took Bible for Lit in undergrad, he used to say, the thing about stories is they're non-threatening ways to change people's minds. Because I'm not telling you, you need to think this. Because your natural reaction, even when I said that, was, no. Just because I'm telling you. But when I say, hey, check out this story. And then I tell you a story. And the point of that story is the thing that I want you to do. And you realize, wow, that's an amazing point. So the story is a much more effective way of delivering ideas. This is why Jesus taught in parables. They're non-threatening. I'm going to enter in and think about it. Change when I'm ready, when I'm prepared. And so the library includes books from varying types from narrative to poetry to prose and more. All sorts of amazing stuff. And apocalyptic literature too, which is still somewhat poetry and prose.
I have a quick question for you. Have you been trained on using your hands when you talk?
No, is it distracting you?
No. Because I went through a training on this once.
Uh-huh.
Because when you were demanding, you pointed to me.
Yeah.
When you were giving me the story to just try and get me to go along, you opened up your hands. That's two
creepy.
different ways to use your hands. It makes you, when you do that, it makes somebody feel more welcome.
Huh.
So they're more willing to follow you into your story.
Nice.
When you point at them, it makes them automatically go.
Yeah, there's like a defense mechanism. Yeah.
Salesman techniques.
No.
Yeah.
I've been teaching 5 to 10-year-olds for 13 years. So
There's something on YouTube about it.
Huh.
It's like the hand guy or something like that. I can't remember.
of course there would be a guy on YouTube called the hand guy.
But he's a professor that
Okay.
teaches
Like,
about the
Gesture science.
yeah.
So we've already kind of been over this. We've got our 39 books of the Old Testament, 27 books of the New Testament, all that fit within this story, okay? So let's talk about narrative. First thing you need to understand is narrative is still history. It's still true. It's a story, but it's history framed within the context of a story. Now the problem is that modern history readers want everything. We want all the details, right? Well, the problem is these guys, when they write the story, they're only giving you the stuff that's important to make their point about what happened. Now, that doesn't mean they're trying to conceal other things. They're just trying to say, look, for the purposes of explaining what's going on here, let me relate these aspects of the story to you. Okay? Because if you think about it, if you actually lived the life of a character in the Bible, you would have so much PTSD, it's ridiculous. Because this seems like they're moving from one terrible event to the next, like day after day after day after day after day. And you don't realize there's like life that happens in between. They're just normal day-to-day, okay, And you don't realize that there's actually a break in between those things. They're highlighting the parts of their lives that help make their point. So please remember, it is still history, even though it's narrative. It is a record of history in a story format which draws together the themes, ideas across the flow of history toward a particular end intended by the author. Okay? Very important, but it's still a story, too. So qualities. First of all, selectivity. Selectivity is meaning. If I select it, it's because I think it's important. If I leave it out, it's because I don't want it there. So in Genesis chapter 5, so-and-so lived so many years, and he died. And he died. And he died. Why have I selected that over and over and over and over again? Or another one of my favorites. And this goes to sparseness as well. Cain is told, in fact, let me read it specifically to you. Cain is upset because his brother's sacrifice is regarded and his isn't. But the problem is we're not told why. So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground, and Abel on his part also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain became very angry and his countenance fell. So why was Cain's sacrifice not regarded by the Lord? I don't know. The text doesn't say. The text doesn't say for a reason. Selectivity and sparseness. Okay? Might I argue with you that, or not argue for this text, that the reason it's not in there is because God is trying to teach that you need to trust me for what should be regarded and what shouldn't because of where I'm going, but I'm not going to tell you where I'm going right this 2 seconds. Because eventually, where is God going in terms of sacrifices for sin? Right, for flesh to be sacrificed, right, not fruits. Now, does the Old Testament law permit for the offering of grains on the altar? Yeah, it's part of the normal way, but never for sin.
Yeah, that was a specific.
Yeah, the offering types are listed out at the beginning of the book of Leviticus. But he's pointing forward here, I think. And because of that, Cain doesn't understand that, and Cain's all ticked off. And instead of just saying, you know what, I get it, I need to just do what you say and leave it alone, he gets mad and he kills his brother. But because we don't get this explanation, it forces us to spend time on why is it that his offering is not being regarded, and then he gets upset. So instead of me being super detailed, what have I forced you to do? Yeah, exactly. Meditate on it. Think about it. You're going to turn it over your mind. I don't know. It's okay to say, I don't know. There's often lack of evaluative statements. David will do something horrible according to Genesis through Deuteronomy, but then the text in First or 2 Samuel won't say, and that was wicked in the eyes of the Lord. You're supposed to know it's wicked in the eyes of the Lord because you've already read it. But you're also having to stop and say, wait a minute, he didn't say this was good or bad. Is this bad? Is this bad? Yes, it's bad. Wait, where does it say this is bad? Wait, David's got another wife? I thought that was... thought you weren't supposed to do that if you were king of Israel. Oh man, I don't think he's supposed to do that. But it forces you to interact. Okay, that sparseness and that selectivity and lack of evaluative statements. I'm not always going to point out to you it's wrong because I kind of expect you to figure that out on your own. Relatively chronological. Sometimes things are out of chronological sequence for a reason. Okay, and you don't necessarily get great triggers all the time as to whether something's in chronological order or not, but most of the time it is. Crafted for effect. Okay, it's very crafted. It's very specific. Okay. It's not being just haphazardly slapped together. It's being put together in a very systematic and careful way. And it's a story with all that implies. All the things about character. And I'm going to throw some words out here and just give me a nod. Or character, a foil. Do you know what a foil is?
Piece of metal.
Do what?
Piece of metal.
Yeah, it's a piece of metal. Or a sword, right? Now, a foil in literary terms is someone I put in the story to act a particular way in order to highlight how good or bad another character is. Okay, because now I can compare the two. So, for instance, in Genesis 37 and 38, we get Judah, who ends up sleeping with a harlot who's actually his daughter-in-law, and she ends up having his children that pass on the family name. The very next chapter is Joseph being tempted by Potiphar, or the wife of Potiphar. So Judah acts badly, but then that highlights how well Joseph acts with the wife of Potiphar. So Judah acts as a foil to Joseph in the next chapter. Things like tension, climax, denouement, resolution, all those sort of narrative flow things that you learned in high school and college, all those things apply. Antagonist, protagonist, all these different literary things that you're used to reading about and with other texts, they apply. Okay? Start thinking in those terms when it comes to narrative. Any questions with narrative? We good? All right. And remember what they said, about 43% of the Bible is narrative. Story. Communicating what God has done in the lives of men and where he's going. Poetry accounts for, what they say, like 27%, something like that of the 33%? 33% of the Bible. Lots of it. A creative literary response to the works of God and the experiences of those who lived in those times. I once heard someone say that poetry is the highest form of linguistic expression because it takes ideas, condenses them down into very few words and very heightened imagery. Okay. Now you'll notice Hebrew poetry doesn't work like English poetry. We do rhymes and meter, right? Hebrew doesn't do that. The way they create the beauty of theirs is they parallel lines together. And there's different kinds of parallelisms that they put together. So there's ones where you'll say one thing in one line, you'll say the exact same thing in the next line, but with different words. Then sometimes you'll say one thing and then say the exact opposite thing in the next line. That's the parallel that's created. There's all sorts of different kinds of parallels, but that's how they create the beauty of the imagery in their poetry. And then they set that to music. Okay. And then, of course, I would argue that if poetry is the highest form of linguistic communication, that then adding music to that's even better. But I digress, because I am a musician. Big thing with this, figures of speech. Okay? Metaphors, similes, synecdoches, metonymies, all these bizarro things that you can look for in figures of speech. I just call them figures of speech as a catch-all. Anything that represents something else. Okay? Structural elements, you'll have time to look at this later on when we actually deal with it when you get to working on Psalms in 102. But you'll actually talk about how the structure of Psalms work, structure of how Proverbs work, very similarly to Psalms. Form types, there are actually types of Psalms. There are royal Psalms, there are lamentation Psalms, there are hymns, there are praise Psalms, there are different types that follow a particular form. I'll give you an example in our own context. You turn on the radio, and a song comes on. And the first part of the song is what part?
Verse 1.
Verse 1, okay? Verse 1, okay? The next section is
Pre-chorus.
usually
Verse 2.
Verse 2, yeah. Verse 2, then what?
Bridge.
Chorus, then
Bridge.
Verse 3.
verse 3, chorus,
Bridge.
bridge,
Instrumental.
chorus. Oh, and then instrumental at the end. Yeah.
Chorus time.
Ancient manuscript. You guys know what the Babylon Bee is?
Uh-huh.
CDC, yeah. You know what Babylon Bee is? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that right? Yeah, of course. Okay. So Babylon Bee is sort of like a fake church news thing. And once it's ancient manuscript reveals that Selah in Psalms means extended guitar solo. But when we turn on the radio, we follow this form. That's how we structure a lot of our songs. This is the popular form. Now, not every song follows this exact form. There are little variations here and there. Instrumental intro, instrumental out. You may only get one verse before chorus. You may get another chorus down here, closing out. But you listen to most songs on the radio, this is the exact form they follow. Okay, the Hebrews had the same thing. They had their own forms that they followed in their heat, but they did it based upon a much more complicated structure of sections. So when you start out a hymn, it has to start with this. When you start out a lamentation, it has to go in this order. So that they were familiar, like, oh, I know what this is. This is a lamentation. Oh, I know what this is. This is going to be a hymn. Oh, I know what this is. This is going to be an ascent song. An ascent song is when we're all going up to Jerusalem to celebrate one of the feasts. So they all knew that. And they use concrete language. Abstract is when I say things like Christophany. Concrete language is when I say things like, the Lord appeared in human form. Okay? So it's not a technical term. Abstract is technical terms. Concrete is specific, very real life ways of describing things. Good on poetry? Okay. Prose literature is like a Rube Goldberg machine. Just like they showed you on that discourse video, I was like, now this happens, now this, but did you realize how this, and then you realize it, and then because now you need to understand that this connects to this, and then if that happens, then you need to respond this way. It's all this kind of, you know what a Rube Goldberg machine is? It's where like the marble hits the dominoes, and the dominoes fall, and hits the cup that goes up and shoots the ping pong ball out. And the whole idea is to get one desired effect at the other end by a simple movement on this end. They're just toys. But that's the way prose literature works. It's like, now did you consider this, but therefore this, and it goes on like that. Create this very logical argument and very logical flow. This happens both in Paul's epistles and in places in the Old Testament. But it's a text of a logical progression through abstract, technical language, though sometimes concrete, to make an argument. Okay? To make a very specific point. Fairly abstract in thought, that is to say technical terminology. Figures of speech are occasionally used for effect. Paul talks about the dividing wall of separation in Ephesians. What he's talking about is the dividing wall that's been between Jews and Gentiles in their relationship with God. But that's a metaphor. That's not a thing. Logical flow of argument, but there's an explicit point to be made in these arguments. And there is the other stuff, but it's very clear in this logical argumentation. So, when we're talking about Hebrew meditation literature, you have to let the text work on you. It's not about you working on the text, it's about the text working on you. The text needs to stir in your heart and make its changes in you. You've got to give it time to work. Americans are some of the most impatient people I've ever met. Man, I'll tell you what, I've interacted with so many Arabs and Pakistanis and Indians. I don't think they know what a watch is. I really don't. I think somehow the world skipped building chronometers in the East because they don't operate on that kind of world. It's just now. You have to be patient and let this work on you. Give it time. This is not going to happen fast. And let me tell you, there's another aspect of this that's very important. You're not entitled for it to work for you right away. It's another thing Americans have a problem with. Somehow you think that you're entitled for this to just, oh, I'm American, I'm an individual. I should be able to get just as much out of this as the guy who spent 40 years working in the Hebrew and the Greek. Not happening. You're going to have to put in your time. I will tell you what's scary to me, and I think I mentioned this earlier. What's scary to me is when just about the time I think I'm getting this in my head, bam, I get something else, and everything I knew was just, it's okay. And I have to kind of slightly readjust along the way. It's not like everything I learned is totally trash, but I have to readjust and redirect. And about every time you think you got your handle on it, it'll send you a curveball. I remember a story about Louis Ferry Chafer, old seminary professor. He's in a wheelchair toward the end of his life, but he's still teaching. His last lecture, He's in his wheelchair up front, and he lays his Bible down and says, "Gentlemen, I got to tell you, I am only just now beginning to really understand the grace of God." He rolls out and flicks the light off as he walks as he rolls out. But let me assure you, if you read his books, you wouldn't think that. I mean, the man had a deep relationship with the Lord and saw things that I couldn't possibly get at this point in my life. And he was saying he was just now starting to get it. That's huge. That's the way it works. Just about the time you think you're going to get it, you're not.
And you die.
And then you die. It takes hard work, and then you wait. You work, and then wait. Work, and then wait. That's how this works. Do your work, but then give it time to work. Okay? I mean, I've been working on Daniel 11, which is just this insane historical roll of prophecy through the intertestamental period. And I'm at the end of it, I'm just like, great, I'm glad all this happened. But what's the point? What's the point of me knowing all this? Because I've got to teach it tomorrow, and I would like to know the point of it so I can tell them what to think. But the whole point is, the Lord was trying to provide Daniel with reassurance that the Lord's plan is moving forward to restore Israel. No study of Scripture should ever proceed without the Spirit. So pray prior to reading, pray while letting the text work in you. Pray when you respond to the text. Pray. Pray while you're sleeping. Pray while you're awake. Pray while you're doing the dishes. You can't imagine how important this possibly is. I can't imagine. Even what I do is not enough. I need the Spirit. You need the Spirit to deal with the text and to have the text work on you. The text is not going to work on you if you're not asking the Spirit to let the text work on you. You've got to work with prayer constantly. Pitfalls. Too methodical a study results in mechanical applications. Okay? Sometimes your response to Scripture when you're done studying is, I'm glad I know that. And I'm sure that in the future, the fact that I know that will cause me to respond to a particular situation the right way. But there's nothing for me to actually physically do about this at this point. Other things you'll work on, you'll do your application in response, and it's like, oh, I immediately need to do this right now. There's actually action to be taken. Sometimes it's just change of attitude. But if you start doing this too methodically, you're going to think that every text you have is you input your observations and your interpretations and correlations. And it reminds me of the machine in Willy Wonka where he's trying to figure out where the last golden tickets are, and the machine's like, I'm not going to tell, that would be cheating. But it's like he's pushing all these buttons, and then out comes this slip. Oh, there's my application. That's not how it works. It's not a machine. It's a living process. It's an organic process, and it works on you. Study now, application now. Too strict a study process can result in thinking the application has to happen now. Just like I said, sometimes the response takes time. It just does. That may not be obvious to you at this point. The Bible is not easy to read. So first of all, give yourself some credit. It's not easy. Okay? Don't fool yourself. It's not easy. It takes time to learn and handle well, and you won't be an expert overnight. Do you remember when you first started driving? I'm sure you guys do.
Yeah.
I almost drove a car in a ditch while my driving instructor was in a car with me. The guy terrified me because he was one of our football coaches, and he loved to get in your face. Although I finally figured out this catchphrase to use with him every time he got onto you, and it just shut him down. And he was like, I don't know what to say to that. It's like, I'm sorry, coach, it was a bad judgment on my part. What do you want me to say? It's just like, and he was stopped. Other than that, it's just inconvenient for you to make that turn or flick your light on. Oh, I get you to drive slow in the school zone. I almost did that wrong, too. He intentionally drove us to a school zone just to see what I would do. And I'm driving along, and just all of a sudden, because he hit the brake on his side. But you remember what it was like. It was a nerve-wracking experience. You didn't feel confident. Now I get up in the morning, and you practically go from home to work or to school, and you're not even really thinking. It's just kind of reflex action for the most part. In fact, I had a scary moment on the way here this morning. I made a left turn under Telge, and I'm driving by the middle school and high school right there at Cy Fair, and I suddenly realized I was in the right lane, and I honestly goodness don't remember how I got there. But you just do things by reflex at some point. I know I checked my, obviously I didn't wreck it with anybody, but I just looked around like, I don't remember how I got in this lane. It was like 2 seconds ago. I just made too wide a turn where I came in that lane, but it's reflex. And you're not going to become an expert overnight. It's not going to happen. I'm not an expert. Okay? It takes time, but it also takes discipline. It's accessible through hard work. Our culture does not value hard work and discipline. Give it to me now. I shouldn't have to work hard at this. You know the campaign, work smart, not hard?
Yeah.
Okay? Do you know where the origins of this comes from? During the 1970s, United States colleges were seeing a drop in enrollment. So they came up with a campaign called Work Smart, Not Hard, where they put a poster out that showed a guy with a big old wrench on his shoulder, all mucked up and everything, in like an inferno engine room. Do you want this kind of job? And then over to the side was a guy in the office, talking on the phone, flicking his pen around. Where do you want this guy? It says work smart, not hard. Well, the whole implication was that you should be able to work smart and relax and not have to do much and still get paid a lot of money. Well, now the problem is that's created this culture where people think they ought to be able to not have to work hard in order to get paid for it. It's not how it works. Never will. And I know this is not popular to say, but those corporate guys making millions of dollars, they're paying the cost. It may not look like work like you think it works, but these guys go home stressed out, worried all the time because all they're thinking about is the business, the business, the business. In fact, Ecclesiastes talks about this exact thing. It says that the work of the laborer is sweet. Because see, I as the laborer, I go home at 4:30 every day. I go home, I have no work to bring home. I can spend time with my children. As a teacher, I get summers off. I don't get paid for it. Now, the money I'm not being paid in the summer is what I'm paying in order to have summer off. I could be making more money. Gosh, look at all these breaks I get to have. Sleep with the laborer is sweet. But those people who own their own businesses, it's hard. You ask this guy over here, he runs his own real estate business. Yeah, I'm a lot less stressed than he is. But this is exactly what it takes. Hard work and discipline. And you've got to put the work in. It's not even necessarily I put in this number of hours so I should see this amount of result. It's not how it works. Okay? Because you also have to rely on the grace of the Lord. This is literally the most important book in your life. Literally. There is no book more important than the book that's sitting, well, not in front of you, but not your journal, not your notes. This book. Give it its due attention, guys. I am amazed by the things I hear people wasting time on. I really am. I hate Facebook. I have to kind of do Facebook because I have to do stuff for CDI and for some other business, but for the most part, I hate it. It's a waste of time. Sports. I don't get the obsession with sports. I really don't. I like sitting down and watching a baseball game my kids play. I don't get it. It's a waste of time. It's a huge waste of time. What bothers me is not spending time watching sports. What bothers me is when guys can give me statistics and player stats and this team traded this team to that. This guy did, and coaches and this and that. And they're, and I'm sitting there talking to my dad, and I guess my brother-in-law was over, and I was trying to figure out who these guys were, and I was watching the Oklahoma-Alabama game. And I'm like, okay, so I just heard on this thing that this guy's like the first, correct me if I'm wrong, the coach for Oklahoma is the first coach to make it to the playoffs in his first year of head coaching. Is that right? Something like that? And the only reason I know that is because I was just sitting there watching the game and they happened to say something about it. It's the only reason I know anything like that. But like the things that people know about sports, I'm like, you are wasting your time.
Remind me not to talk to you about sports.
No, here's the thing. I love watching baseball. It's so much fun. I watch the World Series just like everybody else. I love watching baseball. I'm not a big fan of really any other sports except baseball. My son plays baseball. Both my sons play baseball. It's fun. I like watching games. I like going to games. But I have no personal emotional investment in it whatsoever. And I watch it and like, oh, it's awesome. Oh, and I'm into it too. But when the game's over, I could care less. Just, it's not worth. It's okay to enjoy entertainment, but it's not okay to spend so much time that you know that much about it, unless it's your job. If you work at ESPN, whatever.
And you're helping facilitate everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And now you're facilitating everybody else's waste of time. And you're making a lot of good money at the same time. But don't give up. Keep at it. It takes time. It takes practice. Okay, any questions? So really the big deal with this is I want you to understand that this is literature. Forget the chapters, forget the verses, forget the headings. Start looking at it as the story that is unfolding before your very eyes. And then whenever we get to things like Titus and Philemon next time we meet, you'll be able to approach it with more of the story, like with Philemon. The story, this slave somehow wrongs his master. We think he may have actually stolen some money from his master, ran off. His master lives in a city called Colossae that no longer exists, by the way. An earthquake buried it. And if you go there, it's a big grassy field. It doesn't exist anymore. But this guy, his slave runs off on him. This runaway slave just suddenly ends up in Rome, of all places, which is a good place to go if you want to disappear, really, quite honestly. So he shows up in Rome, and he ends up getting involved with these Christians. And the Christians say, hey, have you heard about this guy, Paul? He's under house arrest over here. You got to go talk to him. So he goes to talk to him. And in the process of Paul talking to this runaway slave becomes a Christian. Oh, that's awesome. So he's talking to this runaway slave. He said, oh, you know that guy? I know that guy. I sent some friends to go work with him in Colossae. I know that guy. Philemon? Yeah, I know that guy. Yeah. Well, yeah, I ran off with some money of his, and I'm actually run away from him. Oh, we need to resolve that. Tell you what, I'm going to write a letter. I'm going to write this letter, and I'm going to send it back with you. Okay? And I'm going to tell him, look, he's been reconciled in Christ, he's now your brother. You need to accept him back and forgive him. And treat him like a brother. Now, whether that means free him or not, it really depends upon a lot of factors that we'll talk about later when we actually talk about it next time we meet. But I'll send a letter with you. So he gets his letter. So, go, man, you got to be reconciled to him. So he heads off all the way back to Colossae. And the next time we hear about an Onesimus in history is that he's, potentially, we're not sure if it's the same guy, that he's actually the leader of a church in a different city later on. Now, how exciting is that? I just walked you through the whole story behind Philemon. And now you get to step into that world next week and actually pick up the letter that Paul wrote to send with him to go be reconciled to his master. Or, even better one. There's this island in the Mediterranean called Crete. Mm-hmm. And these people got a reputation, man. I mean, you ever heard the phrase, don't be a Cretan? You Cretan. It comes from these people. They're bad people. Very bad people. I got this guy, this is Paul talking. He said, I got this guy, Titus. We'll send Titus there. Titus, you go to the church that's already kind of established here, and you start building up the church. But here's the problem. I need you to get some elders. I need you to get some special elders, because if you pick elders that are of the same quality and caliber of character as the rest of the Cretans, we're ever Cretan. This is the kind of caliber of people. In fact, you know what? I'll send a letter to Titus, and I'll tell him exactly what kind of elders to choose and how that leadership should work and how he should work to establish the foundation of that church there in Crete. And so he sends that letter off, and we get the book of Titus, which is really this letter that Paul sent to Titus. So here, this is what you need to do in order to get a firm foundation for the church in Crete. You get to step into that world, into that story, and see the letter, to handle that letter and say, okay, I see what he's saying. And then he handed it to him and said, here. That's the story you're entering into, the story of what God's doing to reconcile the world to himself. So even when we look at these letters, don't forget that they are part of a story. It's like a living artifact of the story. Does that make sense? All right, so any questions about that, or for that matter, any questions over the course of the day? How are we doing? Yeah, not as bad maybe as you may have thought it was going to be, or is it just as horrible and awful as you thought it was going to be in terms of tired? Okay, fair enough. My hope is that with these breaks, these periodic breaks, it makes it not feel quite so exhausting, but I'm feeling it in my feet right now in these new boots. But yeah, so next time we meet, end of February. Last week, I believe it's February 28th is that date. When we come, you will need to have read the observations section of Hendricks and try to finish up the reading you didn't get done on the other stuff. The observation section of Hendricks, and then please, if you get a chance, read through Titus, read through Philemon. On the CDI website, the Bible videos for, pull them up and I'll show you. The Bible Project videos, along with all of the videos that we watched today, if you want to watch those separate from the PowerPoints. What on earth is that? Oh. But that'll give you a good introduction to the books, overflow of the books, and just have a good idea of where we're going with that. But please give them some reading. They're short books, and they're well worth your time. But let me show you where they're at real quick, and then we're going to watch one last Bible Project video on narrative, and then we're going to be out of here. Ooh, look at this. All right, so if you go on the website and go to the BH101 website, it's the coffee mug. You got to have a coffee mug and a Bible picture on your website. It's just kind of prerequisite. Yeah. Cliche would be saying it lightly. There's one video we're not going to get to watch today, and that is character and biblical narrative. And the reason why is the Bible Project is continuing to publish these videos from week to week and month to month, and they're still in the process of working through Bible, how to read the Bible series is what they're doing. And so they just now got done with doing character and biblical narrative. So that was not included with today's. But you'll see that the Titus video is here and the Philemon video. The way these videos work, if you have not seen the read through scripture versions of these videos, is basically they write, I'm going to mute this, but basically what they do is they slowly write out and draw a full poster visual representation of the total book of that you're looking at. Okay, so it'll give you a little bit of background, everything you need to know. They'll talk you through it, and then they'll actually slowly draw the entire book out visually on one page, which, by the way, you can download from their website and actually get the page. And you can also pay a sum of money to buy a coffee table book with all of the posters in them, with some explanation as well. Or if you are a $50 a month donor to the Bible Project, you can get that book as part of your thank you gift. Or if you want to be a $10 donor, you can get their magazine that comes out every quarter too. That'll tell you what videos they're working on, what they're working on in terms of podcasts and education and stuff like that. So, not that I'm pushing Bible Project or anything, but I'm truly amazed by this, because when Jeremy and I first started out with 2Gab, this is the kind of stuff we wanted to do. And then I found out someone was already doing it. It's like, well, never mind, they can do it. Because they do a heck of a better job than we would ever do, because we're not animators. And these guys are actually trained animators doing this. So, but you get the idea. So it backs out, and you'll get a broader view of the book. It'll walk you through chapters and sections. And then we're going to actually break that up ourselves later on. It does the same thing for Philemon or any other book. There are some books of the Bible that they've had a more focused attention on, and the videos are very different than these. But all of the books of the Bible at least have one of these poster videos. So you can always go check those out.